Mesdames et messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, Your Royal Highness, thank you very much for being with us at the opening of this event. This weekend, we celebrated the national celebration of Monaco, the Principle of Monaco, and we're always surprised to see you in photos with a moustache. And intrigued by this moustache, I realized that the bicentennial was that of the Principality of Monaco, and that everybody grew a moustache for the occasion, and I think that's a lovely sign. So we wish you a very happy celebration to all of you. Ladies, gentlemen, dear ministers, dear parliamentarians, dear ambassadors, dear consuls, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you very much for your presence here in Marseille today. In this region, this beautiful region of Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, I am very honored to preside the project of the Regional Council. It's a project because we are acting together to reactivate the European process in the Mediterranean. We are working in order to give natural leadership to the process in our region throughout our history. Due to our geography and our past, the presidents who came before me, our former president Michel Vauzel, Christian Estrosi, and all those who have given a very central role to the Mediterranean, which is so dear to our hearts. At the heart of the Mediterranean, Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur federates energy and initiative and acts as a pivot for the Mediterranean process, a modern and innovative Mediterranean process. We have many regional and local authority organizations here from around the Mediterranean. Well, we have a very, very pivotal role within this process. Of course, new technologies isolate humankind and create even more connectivity despite everything. And the state, of course, carries the diplomatic process, but it doesn't always allow for fluidity and rapidity of the necessary actions for bilateral or unilateral processes. That's why yesterday I brought together an international delegation at the Regional Council building. Over the last 2 years, we hadn't brought anybody together in this way, and that most definitely weakened our natural leadership in the region. We have to remediate this. We've done it, and this is important for us all. And it was the opportunity to share our ideas on different projects, and particularly in favor of the climate. Of course, we have very diverse countries, very close countries, and yesterday we really launched an ambitious political process within the European Union. The idea is to obviously pass on to our children and to future generations a sustainable world. What do we mean by sustainable? Well, we have to face up to all the challenges, the enormous challenges. How can we use the Mediterranean without over-exploiting the resources? How can we create industry and industrial wealth without polluting and damaging a fragile world? How can we allow the whole of the Mediterranean and all of the Mediterranean peoples to access fresh water, clean water, and all the resources we require to live? How can we develop natural economic development, civilizational development, too, while respecting biodiversity in an often arid environment, sometimes a very luxurious environment in terms of growth, but very precious environment? This development has to be sustainable. We have to protect our sea which feeds us, and we have to work to live in a peaceful world. The challenges of the climate and the environment are really the bridge between our two shores, because this brings us together. We, of course, have institutional and political stakeholders who are working, reacting, and sharing and pooling their ideas and action on this subject. And I think this is fundamental. I don't want this conference or summit or whatever you like to call it be just yet another international event amongst so many more. I don't want us to leave at the end of the day with the impression that we're just patting ourselves on the back and making each other happy by being together. I want this to be useful. And we come together not for ourselves, not for us, but we're together, we're working together to work for others, to reach out to others. And this, I believe, is the way to bring in citizens' adhesion, citizen empowerment, bring humankind into the humankind of our territories and of the greater Mediterranean region into this process. So we can't build the future of our populations and peoples without considering their opinion. We can't do it without convincing them of the usefulness of our action. I want, of course, to listen to elected representatives, because without political will and energy, we can't do anything. And I also wanted to bring in company managers, navigators like dear Maud Fontenoy, intellectuals, academics, historians, Antoine Sfer, and so on, and a whole host of people who really, really are the beating heart of the Mediterranean, brought together here today in Marseille. This is part of a world-level approach, a United Nations-level approach, of course, to make this the struggle of the 21st century. The UN has sent a message of support to us, and I will have that read to you later on. So we must remember that the General Secretary of the UN cannot go to every international conference, of course, but he is very attentive to our conference. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I leave the floor, I'd like to just throw light on the work of Monaco and the work of the Royal Highness, Prince Albert. You honour us by your presence, dear sir, because you, over all these years, are one of the most committed leaders on this subject. Your state is quite magical, and politically you've really created a lot of momentum, dynamic momentum in this area, and you managed or ran a sled dog expedition, and you pulled the warning bells very, very early on. That expedition had a special meaning for you, because your grandfather, of course, wanted to do that so much, and it was a lovely, lovely connection back to the past. Royal Highness, you've created a foundation dedicated to sustainable development and environmental protection. Climate change is a subject which is of great concern to you, and you have most definitely helped to progress mindset in this field. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to innovate, we have to upset, we have to upturn, we have to tip on its side, we have to get out there and fight the climato-skeptical parties that don't believe in all of this, and we need to give meaning to this. We need to give meaning to this from our region. Our region has great credibility, and thank you to all the ambassadors and ministers present here representing all the different delegations. If you're here, if you came here, it's because we believe that we can do something together. We're not just here to say that we're the biggest, the strongest, the cleverest. What is expected is of us that we seize our responsibility in a very tactical, strategic and practical way, and that this gives political meaning to the rest of our citizens. That's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be working, exchanging, communicating, talking about culture, about sustainable development, about training, higher education, and business development. And at the end of the day, and Your Royal Highness, I'm sure you will support me in saying this, we need to come up with solid solutions. We need to find funding. We need to call on our European partners to show that we're not just sitting there between two tectonic plates with the Mediterranean. This African environment, which is complex, complicated with its climate issues and its problems of governance, Europe with so much diversity, and then the Mediterranean, this extremely diverse platform that we all live in. And yesterday, as we worked with the different delegations, the common shared feeling was that there are no boundaries for our forests, no boundaries for water, no boundaries for air. So we have to come together, and we need to work to create this collective sentiment, collective feeling, which then will be taken on board within our towns, villages and countrysides by all of our citizens in order to protect the environment together, and that it's not Russia, the US or China that imposes their rules upon us, that we are active players. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, dear President. Ladies and gentlemen, the message from the General Secretary of the UN to Renaud Muselier and all of the participants at the Mediterranean of the Future. Marseille, 21st of December 2017. Dear inhabitants of Marseille, dear citizens of the Mediterranean, before anything else, I would like to thank very warmly the President of Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, Renaud Muselier, for initiating this wonderful project, the Mediterranean of the Future. The United Nations organization and myself attach great attention to this effort impulsed by Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur to become a leading player in the Mediterranean. I would like to really say a very warm hello to the Royal Highness Prince Albert II and Jean-Yves Le Drian, the Minister of French Foreign Affairs. I would also like to say how happy I am that so many decision makers and major stakeholders are here in Marseille upon the initiative of Renaud Muselier to highlight their commitment to the setting up of the Paris climate agreements. I believe that you and all the representatives of the Mediterranean will pursue and amplify this initiative that has been started here, launched here. In terms of humankind, you need to know that this is one of the priority areas for the United Nations organizations in terms of preserving our natural resources, the human rights for refugees, and security and safety, the fight against terrorism. I believe that the United Nations organization, which has set up a plan known as the Blue Plan, and Renaud Muselier is the first local authority representative, regional authority representative to decline this, to develop this at the Mediterranean level. I want to say that this is the goal for all of us is lasting, sustainable peace. And you as stakeholders here today have to build this together. You have to bring together all of the levers from the north, from the south. You have to pool your ideas and share innovative experiences. I am giving you my full support and backing. We at the UN are backing you too. And we hope that you have a wonderful day of sharing in this beautiful Phocéan city, one of the many jewels that the Mediterranean has left us. Thank you very much.
Monseigneur, Monsieur le Président,
dear Royal Highness, dear President, ladies and gentlemen, I am the special advisor of the MedCop, and I manage a workshop on transition. And it's a real pleasure for me to facilitate this day, to act as facilitator for the event, in order to really draw out all the initiatives in order to scale up the process that concerns us all here today. The climate process. 4 days ago, the 23rd climate conference closed, rather mitigated results, of course, very specific climate with a lot of concern due to the withdrawal of the US for 2020, also, of course, the coal issue in France and elsewhere. So 2 years after the Paris Agreement, there is a lot of concern, and we all have to act. And this is why we're here together. This is why we are reunited here. This is why we work together. And this is why there are people who are not here in the room, but are either online at a distance or in another room next door. Thank you, all of you, for being here, and thank you for working for the Mediterranean of the future. I'm now going to invite Maude Fontenoy, please, to join us on stage. I'm sure you all know Maude. Maude is a famous sailor, very involved in the climate, in the environment, and she chairs Committee 21. She's also Vice President of the region, the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region. And over and above the message, I think you're going to express your intimate conviction to us more. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with you in this lovely room where you organize the assizes for the environment, sea and energy in the past. The sea that we all love, the Mediterranean Sea, and I love it particularly because I've sailed all over it. And the more I think about this, the more I think I've probably spent more time on the seas of the world, on the oceans, than on land. And having spent so much time on the seas, when you meet this continent of waste, which is 5 times as big as France, and the density of plastic is 7 to 8 times higher than the density of plankton. That really gets us thinking, because marine pollution comes first and foremost from the land, the stigmats of our societies. And the oceans, of course, are suffering from overpollution, overuse, global acidification, which is very worrying and reaching terribly high levels, and this sea, which has inspired all of us so greatly, really leads us to work towards solutions. Half of the oxygen we breathe comes from, before coming from the Amazonian forest, it comes from the sea, and this is the energy of tomorrow as well, which can serve us and serve, of course, the rest of humanity, if it's done properly, used properly, treasures for the survival of humanity. And all of this is there. Of course, there is a consensus today. We all agree on the fact that we have to act, and we have to act fast. Your Royal Highness, I was very proud with you to develop Air Marine, which can help us to really preserve the future and preserve this sustainable approach to the future. The consensus is obvious, but for this we require will and we require action, and we are not, unfortunately, equal in front of climate change. We've seen it with COPs 21, 22, 23, and the Green Fund is still empty today, unfortunately, again. And today we require solidarity, increased solidarity, because the poorest members of humankind are going to be those impacted the first. 1 billion people, and 1% who are responsible for the problems that we're living today. 26 million people per year are pushed into increasing poverty due to natural catastrophes. And this has a cost for the economy. And the cost is enormous in terms of health costs. It can even reach up to $4 billion. So once again, we have to work together. We have to work together to find the right solutions, and we have to create this sustainable future for the coming generations. Dear Renaud, thank you so much. You decided that our Mediterranean region, Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, be exemplary, be the flag bearer for ecology which is reconciled with the economy, pragmatic ecology, a realistic economy, reasonable ecology. And we're behind you, because behind the resounding silence of Donald Trump, California has acted as an example for the rest of the US, and I hope that Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur will be an example for the rest of France. Our president, French president, wishes to carry the leadership for this fight against climate change, and today is really again a flag bearer for a big international summit which will take place on the 12th of December. Your Royal Highness, you will be present there. And following COP21 in Paris 2 years ago, this will be a follow-up event and will help us to look for funding solutions as well. These funding solutions are extremely important. They are the heart of the matter, of course. We require funding desperately, and above everything else, we need will. And dear Renault, you incarnate this here today, and this political will, this civil society will is here gathered together in this room today. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Maud.
Thank you very much, Maud, and that social dimension, of course, is extremely important. The little phrase that was that accompanies all of this was voted by the UN, is not to leave anybody by the wayside, and that, I think, is essential. I want to congratulate you publicly, because I said that it's very easy and very difficult today. If everybody respects their time slot like Maud just has, it's wonderful. So thank you, Maud. And my goal today is to facilitate all of that and to point out the examples. So thank you, Maud. I'm now going to call up the first round table, please. I need to call up the Deputy General Secretary of the Union for the Mediterranean, Mr. Fami, Remy Rio as well, Hashem Hindi. So, gentlemen, could you please come up on stage here? I'm going to, just before anything else, hand over to Miguel Canet. He was Minister of the Environment and Ecology. He has been named as European Commissioner for Climate and Energy in 2014 and is very concerned by what we're doing. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us because it's just 2 days after COP23. Of course, the COP does not stop. The Chilean presidency has just been launched and will last for a year, but he's sent us this message. Dear Mr. Minister, dear President of the region of Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, the success of COP21 and the Paris Agreement in a record period of time on the 4th of November 2016 is a sign that our planet is recognizing now the importance and the scope of the problem of climate change. We are committed to climate transition, energy transition, which is going to radically transform the way in which we consume and produce energy, and at the same time make our economy more competitive and sustainable. The Paris Agreement creates momentum at a world scale, including the Mediterranean region. Questions of sustainability and climate change are intrinsically linked to the energy sector. Not only are they integrated into national programs of reform of the energy sector, but we're also seeing that most of the companies in the energy sector have included them in their development plan, in their investment plan for the future. The sector of energy cannot change from one day to the next, but the process of energy transition has been launched. It is unreversible and must be seen as a constraint. On the contrary, it throws out enormous opportunities of growth, of economic growth and job creation potential throughout the world. In Europe, we're on the right track to reach our climate objectives in terms of energy for 2020, and we have fixed ourselves some very ambitious objectives to be world leader in renewable energy and energy efficiency. The countries in the south of the Mediterranean must also really carry the gauntlet for this challenge and really take advantage of all the development opportunities brought about by energy transition. The Mediterranean region has enormous potential, and this potential is underexploited today. We have to have a strong political will and much effort in order to pull up the energy investment in the Mediterranean and take it to the level that it should be at. There is a major challenge up against to all of us today, which is that of investment, of money. In order to facilitate and promote investment, particularly private investment in the field of renewable energy and energy efficiency, we have to work on 3 priority areas. First and foremost, the regulatory framework must be clarified and has to be stable and has to be propitious to investment. Secondly, the reform of the energy market in our countries, which must be both competitive and integrated. And finally, access to funding has to be fluidified. The European Union will continue to support countries to the south of the Mediterranean in this way. We are going to intensify action of cooperation, energy partnerships, either bilaterally in the framework of the neighbouring policies or within the regional framework as part of the Union for the Mediterranean. In order to do this, we are going to launch a new financial instrument, which we call the Exterior Investment Plan. This plan will bring in energy, climate change as a priority level sector and will allow for different mechanisms of guarantee and mixed finance, private, public, public-private finance and European funding to be set up. I want to thank and congratulate the Regional Council of Provence-Alpes-Côte for the organization of this event. I wish you a wonderful day, very fruitful discussions. I hope to see you again very soon to pursue together and accelerate the energy transition process in benefit both of our economy and all of our citizens. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. The ambition of Europe, of course, is to become the world leader in renewable energy, as Miguel Canetti just said, and this for the whole of the Mediterranean. And this is why our country has an ambition, like China does, and of course, America is another question. We're going to be talking about this in our second roundtable session. So we have a number of representatives. 197 have signed the Paris Agreement. This is ratified by 77 countries. 2 Mediterranean countries haven't ratified it yet in very, very complicated geopolitical process. We had to have 55 countries representing 55% of greenhouse gas emissions. This is absolutely extraordinary. And we have the representative of the Union for the Mediterranean bringing together 43 countries, 28 Mediterranean countries, the Mashrek, North Africa, and so on. And we have the Deputy General Secretary, who has a strong message to send to us. He is Egyptian, of course, and works with Fatila Sassi, who is Moroccan. So we're seeing here a very Mediterranean group. We've got ministers and representatives of many other countries. Rémi Rio, Director General of the French Development Agency as well, and Iyad Femi, who is Ambassador and Deputy General Secretary to the Union for the Mediterranean, who's going to be the one person to speak to us first. Can you tell us how the Union for the Mediterranean is acting, will act in the future, and to what extent you have a federating, unifying role to play, and also the work that you do with states. You were, of course, a very precious support for the MEDCOPs, the Sahel and Tangiers Tetouan as well, chaired by Yassine Ebari, who is still the president of MEDCOP and who is present here today. So, either you can stay there if you want to, or you can go up to the lectern. It's up to you to decide. Thank you.
Donc, Monsieur Iyad Femi.
Mr. Iyad Femi. Royal Highness Prince Albert II from Monaco, Mr. Renaud Muselier, President of the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region, Mr. Rémi Rio, Director General of the French Development Agency, Mr. Hashim Hamidi, the Tunisian Minister for Mines and Renewable Energy, Mr. Zahra Abili, the Lebanese Minister of Energy and Water. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd first of all like to thank the French authorities, in particular President Muselier, for having invited the Secretariat of the Mediterranean Union to this important meeting, but also for having brought us all together today and remarkable appeal for work together on an
an international level to create a strong and inclusive coalition directed at protecting our Mediterranean. So I wanted to congratulate you for this timely initiative following the COP agreement and following COP21, and to deal with these issues which are really at the heart of the Mediterranean Union Secretariat. It's a real honor to share this with you here in Marseille, in this wonderful Mediterranean city. Ladies and gentlemen, today's conference is taking place at a crucial point for the whole region, where north and south of the Mediterranean are confronted with complex issues, multi-sectorial challenges, and it's obvious that we're all in agreement and we're all convinced in this room that sustainable development is a fundamental element in this struggle against climate change, and that most of the solutions are found in cities. Apart from a local response, the challenges require a collective approach and require regional responses within a holistic framework, an integrated framework, and it's more urgent than ever to do so, and it's absolutely indispensable for the Euro-Mediterranean region. Ladies and gentlemen, it'll be necessary for the roadmap, which we're going to be working out together, to implement the agreements about the Mediterranean, takes into consideration all the challenges to which the region is confronted, as well as the considerable assets that it has. As you know, the involvement of the environmental problems and climatic issues in the Mediterranean can be increased by demographic growth, and with an increased rate of urbanization, which is the fastest in the world, but also by the dwindling of natural resources. It's important to remember that here cities are absolutely at the origin of 70% of gas emissions, of greenhouse gases, producing fossil fuel emissions related to energy and transport. And if you look at the recent forecasts between now and 2050, this is going to increase by 2/3. The Paris Agreement on climate change can only be achieved if we considerably reduce these carbon emissions through transport. And building cities and economies which are resilient to climate change, obviously the improvement of the energy improvement and the performance on an environmental basis of all the modes of transport are all key elements to achieve this objective. On a macroeconomic scale, globally, it's all important to note that amongst the major obstacles to this development are the very low level of regional integration. In our region, we are the least integrated in the world economy. A recent study carried about the Mediterranean Union Secretary General illustrates this challenge, showing that 90% of the flow is located in the European Union, 9% only between the European Union and the countries on the south of the Mediterranean, and 1% between the southern countries. All these issues that we're facing at the moment, to find the right solutions. If we don't find the right solutions, they can be additional sources of instability and could affect the living conditions of the current and future generations of the Euro-Mediterranean region. This type of challenge requires coordinated responses at various levels, on a regional level, national and local level, as well as innovative economies and the right kind of regulations. This means that we can free up the huge potential of our region, which beyond its very young demography has natural and cultural resources, with more than 1,000 protected marine zones and 500 sites which are part of UNESCO heritage sites. This effort has to be an integral part of the world action for the climate, and by making urban sustainability an essential element in national action, these countries will be better able to reach their objectives and even go beyond them. ladies and gentlemen, aware of the need to be in a rationale of action. The Mediterranean Union as an organization, which is an intergovernmental organization involving the members of both sides of the Mediterranean, is working in a proactive manner to strengthen the cooperation and integration on a regional level. This is why the PMU has also developed over the recent years increasing activity, which is part of the two main strategic pillars, i.e. human development and sustainable development. This is based on three P's, and the political dimension via the ministry unions, the platform strategy for regional development, and the project dimension. And this by creating links between the political dimension and the more tangible expressions through projects, to really look at the roots that we're all part of, and ultimately to illustrate the implementation of this work methodology. And allow me just to give you one example of this. The Mediterranean Union on the 22nd of May was in Cairo in Egypt. It was its second conference on sustainable urban development. This conference was the opportunity to adopt the urban UPM agenda, as well as to launch an IMBAB project in Egypt, which is one of the 5 labeled projects where politically approved by the 43 member countries of the UPM, which look at improving the lives of 7 million inhabitants around the south of the Mediterranean. And these projects were developed with the support of the and the initiative for funding urban projects, which is headed by the Union for the Mediterranean. It's co-managed by the European Investment Bank and the French Development Agency, who I would like very much to pay homage to. These projects are part of the projects which are labelled by the UPM, involving 5.34 billion euros in funding, which will have not only tangible socioeconomic impacts for the citizens of this area, but will also contribute to implementing the goals of sustainable development set up by the United Nations. Our actions, our projects, are very closely linked to a dialogue process which is structured, regional, and according to this logic, we've organized on the 9th of November last in Brussels, we had our first regional platform on the development of sustainable, sustainable development to set up the UPM agenda. This platform is intended to be participatory, inclusive, and to enable the affiliation of several thematic groups. And by bringing together more than 80 stakeholders from the 43 member states, on the institutional and financial level, on a regional and international level, where France has been playing a very active role. So I'd like to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, by underlining the fact that the Mediterranean region doesn't need a nostalgic view of its glorious past, the Mare Nostrum. We don't need defeatist speeches about the present situation. Our region, above all, needs to strengthen a positive agenda for the Mediterranean and to capitalize on the huge human and economic potential which is unexploited in this area and which represents a huge reservoir of opportunity in the region. The UPM is ready to support this, to consolidate this positive agenda, and to work with all the partners who are part of the wider family of the UPM, particularly France, Monaco, and through the region, the PACA region, and you, Mr. President, and the VTEM that I have just been able to sign a memorandum of understanding today. This is a wager of our will to really create innovative projects for the Mediterranean of today and for the Mediterranean of the future. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you very much. You insisted on the urban aspect, and we're going to be having a workshop this afternoon in this actual room with an organization which is set up in Marseille, the VITEM. You've just signed a partnership agreement with them, and this will take place later in the day. But for the time being, I'd like to hand over to César Ibamere, who's Minister of Water and Energy and Water. So you have a lot. Water and energy are very important issues for Lebanon, but also for the rest of the Mediterranean. And you have a double competence, really, because in addition to your political involvement, you're an engineer. So you have a very clear and operational view on this matter. Your Royal Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco, Mr. President of the region of PACA, ladies and gentlemen, do allow me first of all to thank the President Muselier for the organization of this event and for this meeting, this encounter, which is of double interest for us. Firstly, because of solidarity, this solidarity in the Mediterranean, which unites us all around this sea, around the Mare Nostrum. This cradle of all civilizations of the Middle East, the Levantine, and in the East. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a duty which we owe it. Our history is based on our climate, which we've been able to develop for the progress of life and civilization in this part of the world. As Lebanese, we have an organic link to the Mediterranean. Our ancestors flourished at the rhythm of this sea. They exploited its resources and they colonized its banks until from the time of Hercules' column. This history and this rich past increases our sense of responsibility and accentuates our sense of duty towards the Mediterranean region and preserving its climate, which is our collective raison d'être. It is for a second reason as well, which is this awareness, this collective awareness of the seriousness of the climate situation at the moment and the associated risks. In fact, planetary warming is due to diverse human activities, which threatens the balance of the ecosystem and is a presence to an unprecedented eco situation. In particular, in the Mediterranean, people are committed through the Paris Agreements in 2015 to combat and confront the causes for climate change through a pragmatic approach to restrict its effect. I'll try to reverse the situation wherever this is possible. To do so, various objectives have been announced and adopted by these signatories. Lebanon is committed to implement the solutions determined with the active role of the Minister for the Environment, Energy and Water. Our ministry has worked on various fronts to do this, essentially that of energy efficiency and renewable energy. On the energy efficiency side, we've developed an action plan on a national level for 2015 to 2020 to reduce our national consumption in energy by 5% in relation to 2010. Other two initiatives were identified and adopted, such as energy audits with ESCO, energy service companies, with the development of green buildings in the residential and tertiary areas with labels for household appliances, etc. On the renewable energy side, Lebanon has fixed a challenge to reach the 12% of our energy needs through renewables by 2020. This objective, considered in 2009 as difficult to attain, has proved in 2017 not only feasible, but something which we can go well beyond, thanks to several projects which have been set up and implemented by the Ministry in collaboration with the private Lebanese sector, which is known for its dynamism and its entrepreneurial approach, such as the projects which have helped us to manage electrical production by wind turbines, for example. This is a first for Lebanon, with a 200 megawatt total capacity. In January 2018, there's a new call for tender to build an extra 300 megawatts. We are looking at a new call for tender for 180 megawatts using solar PV fields, which will be followed in January 2018 with a further tender for 360 megawatts. The minister has also called for tenders for proposals to build a hydroelectric plant with an estimated capacity of 100 megawatts by the Gemini Dam in the first quarter of 2018. The solar decentralized installations, which are based on public and private funding, have been subsidized by the Lebanese Bank, and this provides a support of $600 billion as a loan, which has been pledged by the central bank over the last 5 years for effective energy programs and renewable energy programs. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lebanese market is developing in an exponential manner in terms of renewable energy. It remains one of the most open markets for Mediterranean partners, and the efforts deployed by the Lebanese government resonate in a harmonious way with the international community in the struggle against climate change. We all nevertheless hope that our encounter today will contribute effectively to the collective work which has been set up by the participants. Thank you for your attention.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I'm going to be talking about very operational and corrective things. We have figures to match, and we have a workshop this afternoon about energy and the capacity of imagining a new market throughout the Mediterranean basin. And we'll be talking about this at the closing this evening as well. The president of Mazam is very proud of the installations that have been set up in one of the projects which is ongoing. Mr. Hachemidil, I'm sorry about my pronunciation. Tunisia is very involved in the environment and has been for several years. You've been working on carbon emissions in agriculture, in the tourist arena as well, which is another major area in the Mediterranean. It involves a lot of jobs, as many people know who travel throughout the Maghreb. Sometimes, I get a bit frustrated by the fact that there's a lot of air conditioning in some of the hotels that we encounter there, and I think we have to be careful about this. But your presence here is an honor, and we want to hear your vision for Tunis on a wider level.
My friend, Mr. Renaud Muselier, President of the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region, Your Royal Highness Prince Albert II, Prince of Monaco, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, the ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, the general consuls, ladies and gentlemen, from the Parliament, Mr. Rémy Rioux, who's the director of the French Development Agency, ladies and gentlemen. For me, it's a real pleasure to participate in this conference today called Méditerranée du Futur, Act 1, a joint commitment for climate agreements.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Center for Integration of the Mediterranean and the Provence-Alpes-Côte region for organizing this event. The chosen topic for this convention is very, very important, considering the challenges in energy and climate the Mediterranean region is facing, and also with the setting up of the Paris agreements, both for the north and the south of the Mediterranean. In this respect, we are also aware that energy efficiency and renewable energy provide possibilities for the region for really picking up the main challenges related to energy transition and the climate issues, particularly in relation to fossil fuels. The growth of the demand for energy and the increase of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in the south of the Mediterranean, gives us cause for concern. As you know, the Paris Agreement gave a new impetus to the world's struggle against climate change. This climate change represents a universal demand to which we must respond as governments, regions, cities, companies, and civil societies. The demands which were confirmed on the 23rd conference for the COP23 in the UN Framework Agreement in Bonn, where the urgent need for the conclusion of the Paris agreements and the finalization of the application rules absolutely has to be in place before the end of 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, after the Paris Agreement, Tunisia has added its own contribution in reducing carbon effects through its economy by 41% in 2030 compared to 2010. In fact, on the 17th of October 2016, the Tunisian Parliament ratified the Paris Agreement unanimously. This ratification is part of the continuity of the commitment of Tunisia in favor of the struggle against climate change. Aware of the climate and energy challenges, Tunisia has adopted an energy strategy for the horizon of 2030 to ensure the safety of provision of energy in the country by guaranteeing access to reasonably priced energy for the Tunisian population, but also involving a strategy based on mitigation of greenhouse gases in the energy sector, i.e. the strengthening of the control for demand for energy, as well as the large-scale development of projects involved in electricity production. The main objectives of the strategy are targeting the reduction in primary energy by 30% in 2030 compared to the trends, and to bring up to 30% of the contribution of renewable energies. The achievement of these targets will involve mobilizing $15 billion through investment, both public and private, and the contribution of climate financing. The 2030 strategy also proposes the participation of all the stakeholders, particularly local authorities, in the policy of controlling energy. It means orientating ourselves increasingly towards decentralizing the policy by applying local actors and local stakeholders in local strategies and to develop low-carbon projects. Within this transition, this energy transition, the most energy-consuming area or primary energy, with 25% of national net emissions, to set up conditions for encouraging investment in renewable energies. Tunisia in 2015 adopted a specific law to encourage the production of renewable electricity. And to reach the objective for 2030, the additional capacities forecast are of 1,000 megawatts from 2017 to 2020 and 1,200 megawatts for 2020-2025 and 1,250 from 2026 to 2030, so an additional capacity of 3,500 megawatts. Ladies and gentlemen, the Paris Agreement is an opportunity for Tunisia to accelerate the energy transition as part of the low-carbon trajectory, and we've launched a joint process for adopting a roadmap to implement the national contribution consistent with Article 419 of the Paris Agreement. Tunisia in 2018 is planning to launch low-carbon strategies on a long-term basis. This strategy is initially targeting the acceleration of the transition towards a decarbonated and decentralized system for energy, which is on the basis of the involvement of all the government players, governmental and non-governmental, and particularly the local authorities. Tunisia is hence irreversibly committed to an energy transition which reconciles economy, society and climate. Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Que ça y est, ça revient. Alors, je sais pas
okay,
si
it's back. I don't know.
Donc c'est celui-là.
Okay, we've got the right mic now. So sorry for that. So we've listened to some figures. In fact, it's very complicated when we're not specialists, but 41% and up in 2030 is a particularly big challenge, particularly for a country like Tunisia, which is also facing other difficulties in addition to the climate. And I think it's a strong ambition. And let's not forget the Paris Agreement and the commitments of countries. CPDN in French takes us to a plus 30-degree situation. So thank you very much to have brought this message, this important message in such a clear way. $15 billion, we're thinking about green financing, the Green Fund, and Rémi Rio is going to be seeing the link here because there's no transformation project without financing, and this is one of the roles of the French Development Agency. You're a banker, you arrived in 2016 as a specialist for Africa. What changes for you in relation to the Paris Agreement? And perhaps the D of development could be DD, or sustainable development, as it would be expressed in French, with the unanimous signature of members of the World Development Organization, 17 objectives. How do you see this relationship? And how do you see this Mediterranean aspect? Because obviously in terms of organization, 3 continents are involved. How do you see this specific aspect in your job, in your role? Royal Highness, Mr. President of the region of Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, Cher Renaud Muselier, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, parliamentary representatives, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your invitation, Mr. President, for having organized this day. You can see the room is absolutely full, so this is a sign of the interest. It's more than ever important to talk about climate. It's never been more important to talk about the Mediterranean, and it's never been more important to talk about the climate in the Mediterranean. We have to talk about the climate. Obviously, I was with some of you in Le Bourget on the 12th of December 2015. I was in Bonn a few days ago. As you said, the world is committed to a race towards the abyss at the moment. And if all the Paris agreements are respected, we're at plus 3 degrees in terms of heating in relation to the pre-industrial era. We have to be looking at 2 degrees. We have to bring progressists together, increase our ambitions. And it's the Ministry of Jean-Yves Le Drian who will be speaking about this later, and the President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron, on the 12th of December. They will, during this major summit, they'll be perhaps not celebrating, but really looking at the situation at the moment to increase ambitions between now and the end of the year, and for the succeeding COPs, particularly that of next year, which will be very important. We also have to talk about the Mediterranean, and thank you very much, Mr. President, for really setting this topic. Not necessarily the same Mediterranean, a Mediterranean which I hope will be rich as a new European project which will be developed, a Mediterranean which is rich as a result of this very strong movement that we're seeing everywhere towards the all Africa. I was in Morocco recently, in Tunis. We're seeing the Africans themselves want us to stop breaking up Africa into two between the north and the rest of Africa. And I think this is a real wealth for the Mediterranean basin. Mediterranean is rich in terms of its orient, its extreme eastern section with the Silk Route as well, which China has been proclaiming and is funding, and which is coming just as far as the southern and northern shores of the Mediterranean. Mediterranean will perhaps be more of a link than a simple passage area. Mediterranean, which is not a closed space, but one which is open. It's a positive space, Mediterranean of the future, the one which probably it has always been. And we also have to talk about the climate in the Mediterranean, because the Mediterranean obviously initially is confronted with major mitigations. 75% of its energy consumption remains fossil fuels, with a mega sources of gas in Israel, Egypt, and we have to look at what we're going to be doing with these resources, and what energy mix are we going to be looking at with, as you were saying, Mr. Minister, with this very strong ambition in terms of renewable energies for wind and solar power. The Mediterranean has to adapt. This is a major issue as well, with hydric stress, the stress for water, groundwater and water resources in general. And let's not forget that in the Paris Agreement, in Article 2, there were 3 objectives, in fact, in relation to climate change. There's mitigation, adaptation, and as you said, there's funding and the transformation of the funding system. And the needs in this area are immense in the Mediterranean and throughout the developing world. Why would we talk about the climate in the Mediterranean? I am convinced that we will find solutions to climate issues in the Mediterranean, that we're already in the process of doing so, and that these solutions will inspire Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and the rest of the world. And we are very proud to work with Mustafa Khoury and Zen in working in the area of solar energy, and their work is extraordinary in this area. And the South has inspired the North. In Tunisia, what we're seeing with the greater Tunis work, Istanbul, what's happening in Cairo, what we're hoping to do as well with the Dead Sea Canal. These are all projects which are structuring. These are major projects which will be born here and will inspire all of us. And, Mr. President, I think that in the Mediterranean we can also build coalitions. The COP21 is about 3 things. Let's not forget an intergovernment agreement. It's voluntary commitments of the different countries as well, which is the second pillar. And the third pillar is what we called the solutions agenda and actions agenda, which is this coalition of stakeholders, local authorities, companies, civil societies, and each of these elements is going to strengthen the other to reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement. So obviously what the PACA region can do and what the leadership that it's taking on and the impetus that it's providing, Mr. President, I'm seeing all the companies here in this region, the NGOs, and they've followed through with this. And this is particularly important. In the whole of the Mediterranean basin, you have partners who will also help to heighten our ambitions. I'll finish by saying that the French Development Agency, which I'm in charge, is at your side and will be increasingly involved in a dynamic and resolved way in the coming years. We're in the process of revising our strategy. So up until now, the marker that we used at the FDA was 50% of our projects would have a direct co-beneficiary, which was traceable and measurable in terms of climate change, which is quite considerable in the donor area. We've been working on this the last 10 years, and we've developed the experience of climate funding. And everybody today is increasing the importance of climate funding. So we have to set up new frontiers, new ambitions, and we're trying to formulate this in another way, which would be to say that we hope that our agency is going to be the top development agency, which is 100% Paris Agreement, which means not 100% climate, because obviously we'll continue to work in education and health and other development priorities, but 100 of our projects have to be compatible with the 2-degree trajectory, which the countries around the Mediterranean and in the world have to declare between now and 2020. According to the very terms of the Paris Agreement, we don't want to do anything which would go against this trajectory, and we want to do things in the most dynamic way. So much for the strategy. As you've said, the instruments and the financial means have to follow up on this. More than €1 billion of Mediterranean funding. We're going to be going over 4 billion climate funding with the French Development Agency. So we're not far off our objective here. The President of the French Republic has said that French development aid would be going from 1.55% of our national revenue in 2022. A large part, half of this funding will be devoted to the climate directly. So you can see there's progress to be made. And by creating these instruments, we've developed an agreement with the Caisse des Dépôts, working on infrastructures for developing countries of 600 million in equity. And we know that the fight against climate change also involves modern infrastructures which are resilient. And the final element in terms of what our agency can offer is that we are increasingly mobilizing our own networks as part of this struggle. In France, the Caisse des Dépôts, the European networks, as the Commissioner was saying, we are an European instrument apart from the fact that we're French. And what's very important is the international networks, and for the South in particular. I recently become president of the International Development Finance Club, EDFC, IDFC, which is the biggest national and regional development banks which work together with an international vocation with Morocco, the BND from Brazil, the South African Bank, the China Development Bank, the Indonesians, Mexicans, Colombians, the KfW in Germany. And we have this huge capacity to listen to international messages and to transfer this into our territories and to channel it through our companies as well in each of our countries. Just to give you one figure here, this club produces $600 billion per year, 100 of which for the climate, and they'll be doing more in the future. So these are the instruments that we will be steering towards these international priorities. The final partnership is our territories in France, which Mr. President talked about yesterday. The French Development Agency is attentive to regional projects and will be accompanied in a most dynamic and ambitious way in the future. Thank you very much.